Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We're excited to have one of our partners with us, Lachesis. Chris and Scott will be presenting on cybersecurity is not an IT problem. And just as a reminder, we are recording this webinar and we will post it to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And we encourage you to ask questions during our presentation. So please feel free to type them into the questions box and we will answer them at the end of our session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Scott to kick off our presentation.
Thanks, Angie. Appreciate that. Well, yes, everybody, welcome to the talk on cybersecurity is not an IT problem. So real excited to kind of discuss this topic. I'm Scott Templin, Cyber Risk Advisor with Lachesis. I have Chris Keslin here. I'll let him introduce himself in just a second. For me, the easiest way to introduce myself is to show off my kids. So that's what I'll do now. We have Sam Wise here. Sam, 9 months old today, so real exciting. Just getting out of the dad doesn't ever get to sleep mode, which is nice. But yes, that Sam Wise is named after the Lord of the Rings, Samwise. So if you want to, you can call me the old gaffer if you're familiar with that. If not, then we'll just move on to better jokes down the line, I guess. But I originally I'm a graduate from Butler University down in Indianapolis. That's where I'm from. Started my career with the Indianapolis Indians, focusing on their video board technology and their in-house broadcast and TV broadcast. Working in baseball, having a lot of fun. Met my wife, who has a family farm up here in Westville, Indiana. And so we eventually decided to move up here. And I went from the exciting world of baseball to insurance. Kind of a weird transition, but one that I found really exciting. I got into cyber liability policies. And then started working here with Chris at Lachesis, and here we are. So Chris, I don't have any pictures of your kids, but would you like to go ahead and kind of introduce yourself and kind of how you started Lachesis and where you ended up at here?
Sure, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I don't have any exciting pictures, but I do have two twin daughters that are 13 now and a son who's 6. And my career started off at Indiana University as a grad student in physics, and kind of through that process found out I had a real love for technology and applying it to business use cases. And after I left school, I went to work for a company called Avanade as a joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture, where really the goal was, how do you marry up good business acumen with technological solutions? Because like Accenture had amazing consultants that understood business, Microsoft had excellent consultants that understood technology, but finding a consultant that could understand how to marry the two was the real challenge. So that was really the goal behind them forming Avanade as a joint venture, and just really instilling in us, like, it's only good if it makes sense from a business perspective and a technology perspective. So then for the next 20 years or so, I spent working in that space, sometimes as an independent, sometimes with CapEx Global, and my focus was really Fortune 50 companies. The larger accounting firms, 3 of the big 4, were clients of ours. Really big retail stores, lots of data science, lots of systems integration. Did a lot of work for a standards provider, and through that process, really, I lived through the years when cybersecurity became a real problem for those companies, and kind of watched them go through the evolution of how they had treated it. And then now, over the last 5 years or so, I left that world. I was on a plane 50 weeks out of the year, had an office in New York and London, but really wasn't home a lot. So the wife was kind of like, hey, you're missing it. Your daughters are 9, your son's 3. Have to kind of take a step back here and reconnect with the family. And so I started really focusing on what could I do for businesses and the greater surrounding community, and a little bit selfishly, like, where could I drive, right? And so we worked on a lot of systems integrations at Lachesis, a lot of data science, a lot of reporting, a lot of how do we make business operations better. And then through that process, though, what happened was cyber became a really big problem for our client base. We had one client in particular, Earthway Products out of Bristol, publicly referenceable, that right after we had done a huge ERP upgrade, they got hit by a cryptovirus and it shut the whole plant down. And that really started us down this journey about, it's been a little over 3 years ago now, where we had to start saying, okay, why is cyber such a problem for the businesses in this community and of this size? How can we address it in an effective way? And, you know, what's been missing and why is it still a problem? And that's what I think Scott and I are going to talk about a lot today.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I have some of our key takeaways coming up next here, the different things we're going to discuss here. Angie, if you'd like during this time, if you want to put up that poll that we had asking about if a business has had a cybersecurity assessment, kind of while I'm chatting about the takeaways, and we can kind of go over that. But so have you ever done a full cybersecurity assessment of your business? If you want to put yes or no up there, and then we'll start talking about some of our takeaways here. One of the first things we're going to go over is how cybersecurity is. Oh, I think I got that here. It looks like we got a no answer. And then I think, Angie, yep, thank you. You can give me control back and we'll start that over. There we go. So yeah, and that's not surprising that a lot of businesses we talk to have not done that full assessment. So that's good knowing moving forward. One of the first things we're going to look at is kind of how this current cybersecurity landscape is taking place now, like what's going on out there. I'm sure if you listen to the news, you've heard a lot of information on that. So we'll go into that. We'll do some questions that you could be asking about your security. This is a really good way to kind of gauge, hey, where are we at and where do we need to go? We'll look at how cybersecurity is a business problem and what a holistic approach to cybersecurity is. So that's the thing. Hopefully, after you've listened to this presentation, you'll be able to have a better understanding of those different topics. So as we move forward, this is a fun picture we took of my son Sam while we were strawberry picking. He was not having the best day. I put this up because Chris, who's very knowledgeable, can sometimes start to talk over my head a little bit.
Never happened.
Yeah, if he starts to lose me, we try not to be too technical in these presentations. It's not an IT problem. We're trying to talk about this from a business level. Sometimes we can get in the weeds a little bit. If I put this back up, it'll tell Chris to kind of step back a little bit and let's get back into talking about things normally. So some quick statistics for cybercrime in 2021. There was a 288% increase in attacks from Q1 of this year to Q2. So a huge increase just within the same year. It's been increasing every year, and this year is no exception. The amount of attacks is really going up. We actually had the largest ransomware claim paid from insurance this year at $40 million. And that was the biggest payment. A lot of times when we go over average numbers for ransomware payments, those numbers end up being very high. When you look online, you'll find 3 million, 4 million. I don't particularly like those numbers because a lot of times, especially businesses in this area, you see those numbers, it's kind of just like out of the realm of like, well, okay, if it's $4 million, I'm just out of business. How does that help me any? So by taking it more locally to this area and getting more into the average payments, it gets down to about $154,000 in payment for ransomware. A very high number, but the thing that really stuck out to me is that 21 days of downtime. If you think of a business, how long could your business be down before there's a problem? And I'm going to imagine in 21 days, most places are going to be having some pretty severe issues. Again, that 21 days is not necessarily, I'm not working at all. It kind of fills in the time of like trying to pick up the pieces. Hey, maybe we have to restore from backups or whatever it may be, but there's a lot of downtime there that can be a problem. Jumping down to the last one, I wanted to point out it's a 75% of businesses with a continuity or disaster recovery plan recovered within 24 hours. So that's why we're having these conversations. Being prepared for it, understanding what's there and planning for it in the right way is going to really help your business not be part of that statistic of 21 days down and instead be ready to move forward. And kind of going to, you see 94% of cyber liability claims did not have basic security measures in place, and 80% of businesses that paid a ransom had another attack. So what we're really seeing here is that businesses just really are not prepared. They're not putting the steps in place in order to protect themselves. And not only are they getting hit once, which is likely when it happens, there are a potential for a repeat offender there. So really keeping on top of these statistics is really important. And we could probably spend all day going over all kinds of a number of statistics, so I won't do that. Hopefully, if you're on this call, you already realize the importance of this stuff. But
Right. Well, and one thing that I will add to this that isn't in the numbers is, at least within our area, of the 130 or so customers that we've worked with, most people aren't reporting when they get hit by this. So for every one that you know of, we could probably name off 10 more that you didn't know about. And so the problem is, because people aren't reporting it, just the nature and how many of these are out there isn't really fully understood. So it's not kind of a question of if you're going to get hit, it's more when and how well can you mitigate it.
And let me ask you this, Chris, before we move on to the next slide. The question that we see a lot of like, I'm a small to medium-sized business. No one cares about me, right? I'm safe. What's your kind of response to that, to people who think they're going after the bigger fish, maybe?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, it's just a question of like, how easy is it? So, like I was mentioning, it used to be my Fortune 50 clients, they were getting hit. Well, they've kind of figured out how to roll up the windows, lock the doors, take the key out of the car. They've really kind of made it so that they're not the easy target. I mean, what's the old adage? I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun the guy next to me. Right. So like what's happening now is, like, as the larger organizations have gotten better about this, it's gotten easier to go after the smaller businesses, and they've just kind of worked their way down the chain. And now it's really getting to the point where, they're going after these mid-sized to, small businesses, and they're just easier to get a hold of. So if I can get like $150,000 out of 30 of these businesses versus I can break into one of these really big businesses once every 2 years, what's kind of the more sure payment, right? So they're still going after these smaller businesses. Then to the flip side of that, there's all sorts of new types of crime that are happening here, where they will get into their email system and they will monitor accounts payable or accounts receivable, and they will watch like something come in where it'll say, hey, we've changed our wiring info, so when you pay your bill next month, use this wiring info instead. Well, we had a customer of ours where they got one of those, they sent out the new information. Then immediately after that, they received another email saying, oh, hey, sorry, it was the wrong form. This is where I want you to send the information. It looked legitimate. And, a significant six-figure wire ended up going out the door. And so it wasn't even from ransomware. It was more just from a phishing attack or a spear phishing attack that caused a huge amount of money to go out the door, that caused lots of problems to figure out like who was at fault and what's going on. And just understanding what these different attack vectors are that they're using now is really important.
Wow. Yeah. And I'll bring that back up a little bit later, because when we talk about insurance in the cyber realm, you're going to find that type of coverage, you may be surprised at what's actually covered in that six figures payment. But let's talk a little bit, whether the business is big, small, medium, whatever, large, there's probably some specific questions they should be asking in order to kind of get an idea of where they're at. So Chris, do you want to maybe start at the top here and kind of go down some of these questions and what they mean for a business on when it's about their security?
Sure. So, I mean, the first one's really just who in the organization is accountable for cybersecurity compliance. And Scott always laughs, like when we first started doing these presentations, we said, who's responsible for cybersecurity compliance? And, a very astute attendee had raised their hand and said, everyone's responsible for cybersecurity compliance. It's like, yes, you are correct. That is important. So we have to come up with a different word. What would mean who gets fired if we're not in compliance?
I always think of the sorry to interrupt. I always think of the forest fire guy. The only you can prevent forest fire like sign whenever we asked it first. But yeah, your idea of who gets fired really, I think, brought it home.
Right. So like, just you need that one point of contact, and if you say it's your IT person, you're already in trouble, and we'll cover why that's the case. The next one is, what's the recovery procedure after a hack? And so we're finding more and more, we might have a disaster recovery plan, but like really, what's the first thing that you should do after something like this happens? And having that written down, having that plan in place, and being able to execute to it when you're in a high stress situation can really help facilitate getting back on your feet quicker again. The last thing you want to do is have someone's mouse moving and all their data is locked up and everyone's like, what do we do? And an hour goes by before the first reaction occurs. So really make sure that you have a written documented recovery procedure and what's supposed to happen after a hack.
And so I think it kind of runs into, you're talking about the recovery procedure. What about backup policies? I see something about it being last tested. I know that's a big stickler for you. You've actually had real world experience with this where there's been backups that have failed, right?
Yeah, and so there's two things that we really want to touch on here is first, do you know how much data you're going to lose if you have to restore from a backup? So too many customers will be like, oh yeah, our IT company backs everything up, we're fine. Well, what they don't realize is maybe they back up once a night, or maybe they're able to restore from 6 days ago. But really understanding what are those windows and like what's the point in time and what is actually at lost or what's at risk, understanding what those timeframes are really important. And then the second piece, and we'll talk about two aspects of this as well, is really when was the last time you actually tried to restore from it? We've had customers that thought they had a great backup plan. They got hit by a crypto virus. Everything was locked up and they went to restore from the backup and it was corrupt. And they went to restore from the day before that and it was corrupt as well. So the problem here is like they've never tested the plan. So they weren't, I mean, it's great to have a backup, process running, but if you never actually execute recovering from it, you don't know how long it's going to take and you don't know if it's going to work. So really going through that last mile and testing is super important. And the last thing I'll kind of talk about with this is we've had a number of clients go, well, we've got great backups, so if we get hit by a crypto virus, no big deal. We'll just restore. We're okay with that. Fine. Well, we had a customer that had a great backup procedure, and the cyber criminals that ended up breaking into them went through, spent time, analyzed their networks for probably what the FBI was thinking is about 3 to 4 weeks, figured out what type of backup system they were using, found a way to encrypt and destroy the backups, and then hit them with the crypto virus. So, just having backups is not good enough when it comes to this, but we can talk through some of the different things you need to do to help prevent that as well.
What's relevant about knowing the hard cost associated with a machine going down?
Now, this is where we start getting into realizing that like there isn't a business around now that can run without IT. But we really don't think about IT as the same way that we think about like our manufacturing equipment or our trucks that are running, our supplies to and from different customers. So perfect example, had one customer, I walked in there and I pointed to one of the routers and I said, well, hey, what happens if that one router goes down? They said, well, I don't know. And I'm like, well, in looking at it, I'm pretty sure the whole plant shuts down because you've got everything in the cloud. All of your ERPs are cloud-based. You don't have a backup internet solution. And if that one piece of hardware goes down, even if you did have a backup, your whole systems are still down. So it could be something as simple as buying a $350 backup router to protect an entire day's worth of revenue. But you have to understand, hey, that particular device is going to cost me a day's worth of revenue if it goes down, or 4 days, and with today's supply chain, who knows when you're going to be able to get that replacement if you need it right away. Unfortunately, it's taking longer and longer now, or it's less and less predictable how long it will take to get these replacements. So really being able to break it down and saying, hey, if that server goes down, what's it cost me an hour? If that network switch goes down, what's it cost me per day? If this internet connection is offline, what's that going to do? Being able to break it down to that level will actually help you make better decisions on how to protect against cyber threats and to know whether or not what you're spending is the best application of those dollars to protect the company.
The next question is, how many of users' account have two-factor authentication in place? For those who don't know, two factors, when you do the login, you put in your password and then either an app on your phone or you get a text, and there's other variations where you have to put in a number to be able to verify. How important is this, Chris? I think I know your stance on it, but
Yeah, so 3 years ago when we first started talking about this with people, everyone's like, it's too hard, it's a problem, nobody's gonna wanna do it. Like, I'm not gonna like click on my phone every time I've got to sign into something. But unfortunately, the fact just is if you don't have two-factor authentication in place and you have more than 10 employees that can access email, you're wide open to them getting into that email system. And we'll talk about why it's such a problem a little bit later on when we start talking about the tools that the hackers have. But I mean, I just equate this now with wearing your seatbelt, right? I mean, I'm old enough to remember when seatbelts weren't required. I was young at the time, and I remember my grandfather's reaction was like, I'm never wearing seatbelts. This is uncomfortable. This is ridiculous. But if we do this presentation live and we ask around the room, how many of you wore your seatbelt on your way in today? Everyone does. Like, it's just, you don't even think about it anymore. It's there, you know, versus my grandfather who went so far as to cut the seatbelts out of his truck because he was so put off by it. It's just a new fact of life. It's unfortunate, but everyone's just going to get used to it. It's going to become the new normal, and it won't be any different than putting on your seatbelt. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, every single account, every single access to your network should require two-factor authentication. Get used to it. It's the best single thing you can do in terms of preventing a lot of the different attacks that we'll be talking about today.
and from an insurance standpoint, if you have a cyber liability policy, there's a good chance it's already requiring to have this two-factor authentication in place. If it's not, what I'm saying is by next year renewal in 2022, that will be a requirement. It's not you get a discount because you're being extra secure. It's no, you can actually get the policy now because they are requiring it. The backup procedure stuff is also a part of that, and then a couple questions down you see security training on there. That's another aspect, but the two-factor is the one that I've been seeing the most of. It can throw people off because they'll get the renewal in and it'll say you got to have two-factor in place before we can renew this, and businesses are scrambling because now they only have 2 months or so to get that in place. So definitely important to be thinking about if you don't already have that. This next question, Chris, is talking about how are you able to detect if a firewall is attempted attacks? I know the question is, can you? Why is that important? Why is it good to know where that traffic is coming from?
Yeah, so what's amazing is a lot of folks don't realize this, but the firewall that they probably have in their location already probably has the ability to detect when they're being attacked. And if you just go through and you review the logs and you can set it up to tune itself, it can actually do a lot to automatically block a ton of these normal attacks. And I kind of equate this to just, you know, rolling up the windows in the car and locking the doors. Just kind of by taking a look at what your firewall can already do for you can eliminate a lot of these vectors.
And what kind of security training do you have in place? I know the phishing emails have gotten super sophisticated these days. What's your thoughts on what kind of training should people be doing in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, your end users are your weakest point. So if we're trying to go in and break into a business, the easiest way for us to get in is to get one of your users to click on something that they shouldn't have. So you send them an email, you get them to click on a link, it installs a little piece of software that doesn't even need administrative privileges to create a backdoor into your system, and then from there start to attack. Anything that you can do to help your employees recognize, hey, that's probably not a real email. Hey, the CEO didn't ask for me to go buy a $50 gift card for their nephew's birthday next week and that they're busy. Just, getting them used to this and starting to have them see what these look like is one of the best things you can do to help mitigate threats from your employees clicking on things that they shouldn't. I mean, and honestly, everybody's prone to it. I think I remember the day when it was we were about 16 months or so through our training, and I finally got caught by one. And I think there was a cheer through the entire office when, oh yeah, Chris finally clicked on one, haha. But no, they're getting really good and they're getting sophisticated. So it's good to just kind of get through this training and understand what they look like and keep your skills sharp in that area.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not doing the training, you're already getting the phishing emails, whether you like them or not. So having the training really helps. I see them all the time, and some of them are really good. I mean, that's the worst part about it, right? Is some of these look really good. Most of them, you can tell, but if you're not doing the training, it's hard for your employees to start to discern what's different. Now, the Microsoft Secure Score, I'm going to pull up a screen here, Chris, to kind of show it. Can you talk a little bit about what this is? And I don't know who on the call is actually using Office 365, but if they are, this is relevant.
Yeah, and I like to spend a lot of time on this one a little, or I want to focus on this a bit, even if you're not using Office 365, because the whole concept of being able to do this kind of monitoring and measuring is really important, especially as the years are going to come through. So what Microsoft's done is they've put together this dashboard, and you can see the URL at the bottom. If anyone from your organization is an administrator in Office 365 or a security admin, they can get access to this dashboard. And what Microsoft's doing here is they're looking at what are all the features of Office 365 that you have turned on or turned off. What are all the security settings that you're taking advantage of or aren't? And what's then your score out of the possible most lockdown configuration you can have? And really, unfortunately, if you started your tenant more than 9 months ago, your secure score is probably 23% or less, because Microsoft had most of the defaults turned on. They didn't require two-factor authentication, and it was really a very loose configuration by default to make it easier to adopt it and kind of use the different features and take advantage of everything that was there. Fortunately now, if you're a relatively new tenant, like it kind of comes by default lockdown, and you have to start turning things on, so it's a little bit better. But what we're finding is most of our customers have a really loose secure score, and it makes it really easy for hackers to try to go in and get into your tenant. And once they're in, they can not only read your email, but they can read everyone's email, and they can really just kind of sit there and lurk. And it exposes you to a whole bunch of different attacks that can happen. So anything that you can do to just get your secure score up. We generally try to shoot for a secure score, but at least of 40, but ideally like 50 or above. So you can kind of see this one example here is at 46. This is off the Microsoft website. But being able to get this turned up and locked down is great. And this tool will even tell you kind of what you can do to raise the score. So like here you can see it says turn on Microsoft Defender Application Guard Managed Code. If you don't know what that is, you can click on it. It'll tell you how to turn it on. It'll tell you what the effect is. And then your score will go up by 1.1%.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty intuitive little process. We've been asked a couple times about if Google Suite or any of those have similar things. We've not been able to find anything that's to this level. But I think the general idea of protecting your email is really important. Now, Chris, I really want to get in kind of the meat of things here. We've talked about some of the risks, some of the questions they should be asking. The idea here being a lot of businesses want to almost step forward a little bit too quickly. There's a lot of silver bullets out there in the market, as you said, right? Like, I know I'm insecure. I want to fix it. What product can I buy to make my security better? I think that the way Lachesis goes about things is a little bit different. And as you see, we're going to talk about the business side of things. How is understanding my business, help me with my cybersecurity? Can you kind of walk us through this process?
Yeah, so really you have to right size your security for what your risks are. And cybersecurity has to be approached as a risk management problem. It cannot be addressed as a technical problem. It can't be addressed as an IT problem. And you can't just go buy a tool that's going to solve all your problems, right? And so the first thing you really want to do is you want to build a model that makes sense based on your business, the value of your business, or like when we do these types of reviews for school systems or for county governments or for local governments, it's really like, how are you being a good steward of your tax dollars? But you really have to sit down and say, like, how is it that we make money, or what are the services that we provide, and how are they impacted by the different technologies that we rely on? And then how can we take that and break it down so that I can say, hey, look, this server represents a $2.7 million business risk based on the security vulnerabilities that we found on it, and based on the policies and procedures, which we'll talk about later, that we have in place. The calculated likelihood of it becoming a problem can be determined through the process, and then we can come up with a weighted business risk value. Now, what this enables us to do then is to say, okay, look, we know every vulnerability that we found. We know every policy and procedure that we could do better on. But if we spend X dollars on fixing this problem, how is that going to reduce the business's risk? And how do I know whether or not, like if I've got $15,000 to spend this year on improving my cybersecurity, how do I know that I got the biggest impact for that $15,000? And without taking this step back and doing it, I see too many companies rushing to buy the latest firewall, which could cost X number of dollars, or buy the best antivirus software out there, or subscribe to some service that's going to monitor like everything about me and tell me if like my information was found on the dark net. All of that's great, but it's like if you don't know if you just need aspirin or if you need antibiotics or if you need some kind of antiviral, you could actually do more harm than good by applying some of these different techniques. Every one of them has a place, but unless you know and diagnose which one is going to be the best for you, you could really be just, to be blunt, wasting your money on these different, tools, techniques, products that you can buy out there.
And I think that's where, we start with the title, right? Cybersecurity is not an IT problem. We're not here to beat up on IT guys, but how often is the person you trust for your IT discussing bottom line dollars like this? I think is really where the question comes in. Where would you say your IT guys, how is he important in this process? And, compared to, we don't want to dog on him, right? Like, what are they doing well and kind of what are we missing?
Sure. Yeah. A lot of times I've got to coach business owners. They're like, well, my IT guy should know all this stuff. And, or my managed service provider should know all of this, or, this is what I'm paying them for. And I really have to kind of take a step back and give the analogy. It's like, look, hey, when I go to my doctor because I've got a cold, or I'm going in for my annual physical, or I need to go get my blood pressure checked, like I'm going to my general practitioner, and that's really what your managed service provider or your day-to-day IT guy, he's your general practitioner, definitely a doctor, very skilled at what he does. But if I have a heart attack, I'm not going to my GP for open heart surgery, right? The field has gotten so specialized that you can't be great at everything. You can't keep the printers working and the laptops working and the switches working the way that they're supposed to and the website up and running. You can't do all of that and understand how quickly the landscape in cybersecurity is changing. So really you have to, they need to be part of the solution in terms of the team that needs to be brought together. And that's really where this quote on this next slide comes from. It's a business problem that requires collaboration between leadership, operations, relevant specialists, security experts, and IT. And each one of them has a big part to play in this. So if you don't understand the business and how we make money and how each piece of technology contributes to that bottom line, you can't know what the right cyber mitigations are that are going to protect that business. Now you can say, hey, this is bad, but like you really need that bar. And so that collaboration is so critical.
Yeah, and I'm glad you read that, Chris, because that's why you started going right down that path. So I'm like, let's go ahead and go to the quote here, because that's where we're leading. We talked about kind of the business side. Let's now kind of talk about how do we find where those problems are at, where those risks could be, because we have a number of different kind of areas here. Defense is the one when we think cybersecurity that most people are thinking about. What I'd like to do is kind of, we can go around here and talk about them, but I want to be specific on like some real world examples of things that, have kind of played in. We've talked a little bit about defense, about security software, antivirus, those kind of things. Is there anything specific in that kind of sticks out to you that we haven't already discussed?
No, really, this is just, I think folks are getting a good handle on this area. I think most people know what antivirus is. I think most people know that they need a firewall. There's not a whole lot here that we need to think about other than just realizing if you look at this in a silo, it still could be there could be a lot of gaps. Like, so you might think everything's protected, but unless you look at it from a different lens, you're just not really sure where your exposures are. So, kind of skipping through that, do you want to go counterclockwise this time, Scott?
Sure, yeah. You
all right.
Policies and procedures, is that what you're, yep.
Yeah, so policies and procedures, like the best example that we have here is this is just, what are the rules for how, you use technology or how you operate within the business. And so we base a lot of the reviews on CMMC framework, which is the cybersecurity maturity model certification that the DoD uses. But there are other frameworks out there that we can base it on, like HIPAA or CIS, or take your favorite NIST requirement. But
I thought insurance guys used a lot of acronyms, but there's plenty of them, and I guess every realm. But
right, yeah. So you take your favorite policy and procedure that makes the most sense for your business, right? But what this will do is it gives you a set of rules that say, hey, when we hire someone, these are the access credentials that they need. More importantly, when somebody's let go, these are all the things that we need to turn off. So too often businesses that we'll work with will have they'll have Office 365 for their email, then they'll have a local domain account, then they'll have Dropbox, and then they'll have Smartsheets, and then they'll have like 3 other pick your favorite software as a service provider accounts, like maybe it's their ERP, where this person has accounts in all of those systems. And so there's usually a good mechanism to make sure that someone has all the access they need because they can't do their job. But when they leave, making sure that it all gets cleaned up. That's an example of a policy and procedure that needs to be looked at. I mean, another one is like that example of that municipality that we had worked with where they got stuck with wire fraud, right? They got an email saying, hey, this is where we need to receive, or this is the wiring instructions for receiving this rebate. And then immediately right after that said, oh wait, nope, I messed up, use these instead. It looked completely legitimate because they already had access to their email, but because they didn't have a policy in place that said anytime I receive wiring change instructions, I'm required to pick up the phone, talk to a human being, verify that this is the correct account number before calling my bank and applying it, the wire transfer got sent, the money was lost.
and that's a good example of like, even if you, with your IT department doing a great job of helping with everything, they're not the ones writing that kind of procedure for the company, right? So even if everything's top notch, we got the right protections on your emails and all that stuff is in there, something like that could easily slip by if you're not thinking about it. On the regulatory side, we see a lot of things with HIPAA, and I know this can affect nonprofits a lot. We've seen where that's come into play. Anything specific in that realm that jumps out to you? I think of the nonprofit recently that had some requirements for a grant that they could have lost if they weren't following the right procedures.
Yeah, so we had a nonprofit that we were doing a review with, and they had a requirement in the federal grant that said that they had to follow a certain NIST standard in order to be eligible for the funds. And they said, of course, we'll put together the cyber policy. It'll say that we follow this NIST standard. Away we go, and they started receiving the funds. Well, unfortunately, they didn't go through and then go look at that standard that they had signed up for, which would have probably, it was not feasible for them to be able to follow the standard. It was cost prohibitive for this particular nonprofit to be able to do it. And now they have a liability in the fact that that grant money, should something happen or should they get investigated, could all have to be repaid, and it would close down that not-for-profit, which is doing amazing things for the community, is now completely at risk because they just didn't understand how to take it all the way through. Because once it gets really technical, it's just no fun and it's hard to read and it's next to impossible to understand. It's like trying to understand patent law without being a lawyer, right? Like you really need to have somebody that can take it to the next level and then break it down in plain business sense to say these are the things that we need to worry about. So we're starting to see a lot of exposure on this side because of the new regulatory requirements that are coming through.
And I'm going to skip over offensive. I want to do that one last here, but the training side, we talked about that, about having there's obviously the phishing training that can go into place, but really, Chris, I think you said it best earlier that employees unfortunately can kind of be the weakest link a little bit in this regard, and that includes not just employee, but also, as you said, executive level people, right? That could also cause it. It's knowing what those issues are, and by not doing some type of awareness training, could really put yourself in a tough spot. No matter how good your firewall is, if you're clicking links to let people in, it's not going to be very helpful there. Right. And I want to talk about insurance. Because there's a few things that stand out to me in this regard. We've talked about the wire fraud issue. I know specifically on a lot of insurance policies that I look at, if the claim came from a phishing attempt or a social engineering, so any of those types of, hey, they're acting like somebody they're not, hey, I'm your customer, send me the new routing number information, those kind of things, often a much lower sublimit of coverage. So you could have $1 million on the policy, but I'm seeing $50,000 as the coverage if it originated from clicking on a bad link in a phishing email. So even though it's real important to kind of review those policies, because we'll see, hey, I got $1 million in coverage, that's good for me. But if you only have $50,000 in coverage for this wire fraud that was $300,000, well, the rest of that could be paid out of pocket. Another thing that you like to talk about, Chris, is how the application is important. How they fill out an application can really make a difference. Do you want to touch base on that?
Yeah, so one thing that we realized as we started going down this path with folks is, hey, we got to get cyber insurance. Hey, I got this I got this application I've got to fill out. I don't know any of the questions. I'm going to hand this over to my IT guy, or I'm going to hand this over to my managed service provider, right? Well, the problem is they would look at it and they would see it as a test. And I'm not saying that they wouldn't answer it like untruthfully, but they would answer it aggressively. Let's say they answered it aggressively. So an example of that would be, does all remote access to your network require two-factor authentication? Right? Well, they'll say, of course it does. Yes. Moving on. Right? Well, they might have allowed access into their network through a phone that didn't have two-factor authentication turned on. Now, the minute any kind of breach occurs, right, they'll go back to that application document because it's a warranty document, and they'll say, oh, hey, well, you said that you had two-factor turned on for all methods of remote access, and we found this one, so guess what? Now you're not covered at all. So you really have to read through these and understand very carefully how they're worded and answer them very conservatively. And what we're finding is how you answer these questions does not determine what your policy coverage is going to cost. It determines whether or not they're going to cover you. So it's actually better to be very conservative and submit it, saying, hey, I'm not sure if it's everything for two-factor authentication, or I'm not sure that we do phishing training every quarter, or I'm not sure that we've practiced our restore and that they're offsite, or we've practiced our backup restore every 6 months, and I'm not positive if all of my offsite backups are offsite and encrypted. Like, if you're not 100% sure, it's better to say no, and then have the insurance company come back and say, hey, well, we can't cover you unless you fix this, or they'll say, okay, we'll accept that risk and move on. Because the last thing you want to do is be aggressive in the answers and then just not have the coverage that you were expecting.
Yeah, and I can tell you from experience, you're not going to get a discount by trying to answer it better, like you said, with the cost. So talk with your agent who will then get the underwriter involved who's in the policy. Can be very helpful. All right, Chris, yeah. Let's talk about offensive now. This stuff is kind of exciting to me. I guess I'm kind of a nerd in that regard, but what does this mean by offensive security?
So really, this is taking the tools that a hacker would use and turning them against yourself. So you might have heard of it called pen testing. You may have called it vulnerability scanning, but it's just taking those tools and looking at your business through the lens of how a hacker would see it. And you would be amazed at the things that we'll find. So for example, we had done one of these reviews for an insurance company, and they have pretty tight requirements. Most of their policies and procedures were locked down really well. They had really good network firewalls. They're getting A's across the board on just about everything. And then we took the offensive tools and attacked them. And we're like, hey, where are these 2 Windows XPs? Like, you said you didn't have any machines on your network that are Windows XP and that they're all up to date and they're all updated. But we found 2 Windows XP machines in your LaPorte office. And they're like, no, we don't have any Windows XP machines. That's not possible. I'm like, no, you do. And they're on this port and they're on this port. Go into the closet, find it. And what happened was they were in a building that had multi-tenants, and 2 of the ports were cross-wired. So the attorneys next door to them, 2 of the attorneys were actually plugged into their internal network directly and had full access to their networks. And there was no way that they would have been able to see or identify that without taking these tools and putting it against it. And the reason Windows XP is so bad is like if there's a single XP machine on your network, you're wide open to a crypto virus. Like there's just well-known, documented. You don't have to be a hacker to figure out how to do it. You can lock up someone's entire network if you can find one of those machines on it. So it's super important to look at yourself through the lens of how they see you. Then you can start to identify, okay, well, what are the cracks in the windows or the doors that are wide open that I want to close first, and really help your risk profile a ton by looking at it through that lens.
And I want to show off one of these, just to kind of really hit home how scary this hacking stuff can be because of how easy it is sometimes. And Chris, I'll let you talk on this a little bit, but this is one of the I believe you use this directly, but this same program was used by a high school student out of Valpo to basically shut down a school. So can you talk a little bit about like this is just one of the programs, but kind of how easy it is for these hacks to happen and why it's important to be looking at it?
Yeah, so what you're looking at here is what's called the Kali Linux desktop. It's a free operating system. You can Google Kali, it's Kali. You can download this operating system. You can install it on a Chromebook or a laptop or any device that you want. They've even got it so you can install it on a Raspberry Pi for those of you that like the little IoT cheap devices. But it's a complete tool set with all of the software necessary to perform any one of these, engineering attacks or crypto attacks or exploitations. And so like what Scott's got pulled up here on the screenshot is this is the start menu of the operating system. And it just gives you a cookie cutter play by numbers, like this is how you go about attacking a company. So if you click on information gathering, it'll give you like 6 programs that are going to go out there and it's going to find all of the websites. It's going to mine LinkedIn. It's going to mine social media. It's going to find everyone associated with that business. And it's going to put it all into a little database. And it's even going to try to say, we think this is the CFO. We think this is the president. We think this is the head of sales. We think this is the head of engineering. And it's just going to go out there and it's going to gather all that information up and put it in a neat little database. Right? Then you can go on to O2, vulnerability analysis, and it'll give you like another 8 or 9 programs that you can then point against that company and say, hey, take all the information you learned in information gathering and run all of these tools against them. And here's their website, and here's their firewall, and here's their VPN, and just start going through and figuring out how can we break in, or what are all of the vulnerabilities that you can find, right? Then, web application analysis, if you want to try to break into their website. If you see that they've got databases, you can go through and you can check out all of the problems with their database. And now you can take all that information gathered in steps 1 through 4, and here's a whole bunch of tools that will let you try to break into their systems by finding or cracking or guessing the passwords. And this is why two-factor authentication is so important. If you have more than 10 employees, odds are I can get into your system by one of your employees because of the information those first 4 steps had already found for me. So for example, even though everyone knows you're not supposed to use the same password for every site, somebody still does. Or worse, they use the same password, but they put a 1 to the end of it, or they change an O to a 0. So there are tools under the password attacks where it's like, if I can find a password on the dark net for one of the people that I found associated to your company, I can give those passwords for that person to these tools, and it'll just start trying to log into their email nonstop by just doing variations of the passwords that it found. And it really reduces the amount of time it takes to guess or find that password. And then once you've got that foothold in, sky's the limit, right? And then you can kind of keep going through and like, here's how you break into their wireless network. This is how you reverse engineer something to create your own virus. These exploitation tools are really like, how do I deploy a crypto virus to them? How do I do denial of service? How do I damage them? And it's just all there free for you to just pull down and start using. So you don't even have to be a programmer to know how to use this. You just have to click around. And to the example that Scott gave about the Valpo school system, You know, it was COVID time, everyone had to go home, and then Velpo went back to a hybrid model where you could choose to go to school or stay home. One of the students, you know, went back to school, was really mad that he had to go back to school because he wanted to stay home like his friends did. And so he used a tool similar to this to try to take out his classroom, and he thought it was funny. Well, what he didn't realize was it did such a good job, it actually shut the school system down for 2 weeks. The FBI got involved. You know, I mean, I'll hire the kid. It'll be great. But now this poor kid is like, and that's one thing I should mention too. If you use these tools without the permission of the people that you're using, they fall under, some of them fall under ITAR regulations. So huge criminal penalties like weapons of mass destruction type regulations are set on these. So you can get in a lot of trouble without a lot of knowledge. And because it's so easy and available, you really want to turn these loose on yourself to at least see what they see. And then you can make some better decisions.
I just think that's a really good transition, Chris, kind of into the next part, because we are getting close to our hour here. So I want to make sure we, you know, are conscious of the time. You talk about, hey, turning these against themselves, those kind of things. We've talked a lot about, you know, doing a business review and all the different aspects of security that a business wants to be looking at. All really important. Obviously, this may be, depending on their knowledge, it may be very difficult for a company to do for themselves. So obviously, that's where Lachesis can come in and kind of help with this process. I know that at the beginning of this process, you used to do this as kind of a one-off. You do a report, hand it to them, and found that there wasn't a lot of continued success because people would just kind of read it and nothing would happen. Can you talk a little bit how that's changed, about how we've turned this into kind of a year-long program, how we continue scanning, and how we kind of turn this into something a little bit easier to understand with the remediation worksheet, and kind of how we drive success in that manner?
Yeah, so I mean, and Scott hit the nail on the head. When we first started working with this, it was like, hey, here's all the things that are wrong. Well, that's hard for a business to take action on, right? So then we realized, okay, we really need to get the business involved, and we need to understand and create this business model so that we can better stack rank these vulnerabilities or these issues that we found and be able to attack them in the most cost-effective way that will reduce our risk. So that's how the business piece came in. Then as we're going through this from a risk management perspective, we're like, oh, well, you know, a really key part of this is insurance. So, but to analyze an insurance, you know, policy, you have to be a licensed insurance agent. So we've got to get, so now we've got an accountant on the team. Now we've got a licensed insurance agent on the team. And then we've got somebody that understands policies and procedures, almost like an HR/business operations perspective. And then at the last piece, you've got, you know, your technologist, and then you've got your security experts. So we have to distill all that down into something that we call the security remediation worksheet, where now we can stack rank it and say, okay, this risk represents this much, or this issue represents this much risk, and it'll cost this much to fix it. Is it easy? Is it hard? And then do you want to accept that risk? That's a perfectly acceptable answer. Do you want to insure that risk? That's okay too. Or do you want to take the time to remediate it? And then what we'll do is, once we kind of have this playbook in the process, we'll continuously monitor for new vulnerabilities. And then once a month, we'll say, okay, hey, last month when we met, we were going to work on these 3 things. Did they get done? Did they not get done? Here's a couple of new things that we found. Do you want to accept them, insure them, or remediate them? And just continuously work with them on a monthly basis to say, what are we doing to move the process forward? And once we started that, instead of our customers just getting like their eyes wide open and going, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it's so bad, and then us talking to them 6 months later and being like, oh no, it was great, but I just haven't had time to do it. By kind of changing it into a risk process where it was like, you know, we meet once a month, we review it. It was amazing that at the end of the year, our customers were starting to see a real improvement in their risk profile, instead of just, you know, hey, here's everything that's wrong. And so thinking it through, having the right team put in place, having the right, you know, cadence for meeting and making sure that things are moving forward. I mean, we all get busy, right? That way that by the end of the year, they could actually see a real value from the process, and they could be confident that the money that they spent to remediate some of these issues really did help the business in the best way forward, instead of just, it's oh, my insurance says I have to buy phishing training, right? So it just really helped in that whole perspective and made us a lot prouder of the product and the end result for our customers.
And we actually now, part of the process, you talked about the phishing training is included in it. So if that is something you're interested in, it is included. I will point out before we ask questions to the group, I will say, if you're looking at this last slide, don't be concerned if the left picture is alien to you, because it's kind of supposed to be. That's kind of the tech side of things. It's diluted down into that remediation worksheet. Your tech guy would probably understand a little bit more. Again, we're not here to replace or compete with that, your trusted IT source. Again, this is a different thing. So are there any questions, or Angie, did you have any that had been posted while we were talking that we can help answer here now that we're getting to the end of our presentation?
Thank you, guys. No questions have come through yet, but if anybody does have any, please go ahead and type them into the questions box so we can get those addressed for you.
Chris, I got a quick one that always gets asked to me a lot is, this sounds like a lot of work. How much time could an owner or a CFO, controller, whoever, would they be expected to put into this?
Yeah, and I don't have the sheet in front of me, but we've got it pretty well broken down to, maybe 14 hours of the owner's time over the course of the year, 8 hours of the controller's time, a bit more time of the security or the managed IT provider or the director of IT, obviously, because they'll be doing a lot more of the heavy lifting. But we've kind of got it all broken down to, here's the 14 meetings that are necessary, here's all of the steps, here's what will be addressed in each of the meetings, here's the deliverables of each of those processes, and then here's kind of what you can expect at the end of the whole process over the course of the year.
So pretty manageable, but I think at least, but good deal. Okay, well, Angie, if we didn't get any other questions, I think that I think we've covered a lot here in an hour. I know it can feel like a whirlwind sometimes, so I'll put my contact up there in case anyone has anything they want to put to me directly, and I can get Chris in the loop. Chris, any final thoughts or scare tactics you want to throw out there while you have the time?
Wear your seatbelt. I mean, two-factor authentication. And go find out what your Microsoft Secure Score is.
Yep.
If you can do those two things, I mean, just those two things alone will pay huge dividends for you as you go forward.
Okay, all right, well, sounds good, guys. Thank you very much. No questions have come through, but like Scott said, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to him or your account manager here at Innovia Consulting, and we would be more than happy to address those questions with you.
Thanks,
so
Angie.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. If you're watching on demand, thank you for taking the time out to watch this. Thank you again, Scott and Chris, for the presentation. A lot of information, a lot of good points that you addressed. So hope you all got some good takeaways from the presentation. We do have more webinars coming up. Tomorrow, we have one of our application consultants, Crystal Tullison, who's going to be presenting on Going Beyond Fixed Assets Part 1. And actually, that's going to be next Tuesday. Apologize for that. So you can check out our website for more of our upcoming events, and that's innovia.com/events. And we do have training workshops on our website for you to take a look at. You can visit our training workshop page at innovia.com/workshops for more information and to register for the training workshop that fits your role. And we do have our Innovia Conversation podcast. We have a library of podcasts for you to listen to. You can find out about all those podcasts on our podcast page, and that's innovia.com/podcast. All right, well, we thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another Innovia webinar. Take care, everyone. Thank you.